night may be long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
Good evening, good morning, and welcome. It's Beyond Reality Radio. I'm your host, JV Johnson, and if I sound a little frazzled, it's because my assistant producer, Orion, just startled the bejeepers out of me. I don't know if you caught that on the YouTube stream, but yeah, I'm going to get the headphones on. You can't hear what's going on around you. Next thing I turn to my right, which, by the way, the other night I had turned to my right, and I thought I saw a man standing there, a man with gray hair standing right next to me. And, of course, when I got fully around, there was nobody there, and it happened a couple times. So as Orion sneaks up on me and wants to tell me something about, I don't know, what flavor gum he's chewing. I'm not even sure what it was. He scared the bejeepers out of me. So that's how I'm starting the show tonight. So you get to get a frazzled host, at least for the first part of the show, but it's probably appropriate because tonight we're going to be talking about a topic that might frazzle some people. Reincarnation is something that's been a curious topic to people for a very, very long time, whether you're religious, whether you're not. The soul and what happens to the soul after death. Some say it just disappears. Some say it goes somewhere to the greater consciousness. Some say it returns in the form of reincarnation. And our guest tonight is going to take that approach. Stephen Sakellarios is the director of a documentary film called In Another Life, Reincarnation in America. Plus, he has his own personal story of reincarnation. He contends he knows who he was in his former life, and he has evidence to prove it. So we're going to talk with Stephen tonight about that. Tomorrow night, of course, is a best-of program on Beyond Reality Radio. And then as we look to next week, we've got two guests on Monday night's show. Scott Wolter will be in the first hour. Scott is a forensic geologist. He's also the host of a program called America Unearthed. That's on the Travel Channel, and there's a new season starting on the 28th of this month. So it's that 4 days? If you're on the East Coast, it's 4 days. If you're on the West, it's 5 days. But he'll talk about the new season of America Unearthed. That's the first hour on Monday night's show. The second hour of Monday night's show, Chad and Alta Dillard are going to talk about UFOs, time anomalies, and alien implants because they've experienced it all firsthand. They've got a book called High Strangeness in the French Quarter of New Orleans, and it discusses all those things, and we'll chat with them in the second hour of Monday night's program. So a lot coming up on the show, a lot of great stuff, of course, and we're happy to have you along with us. I want you to stop by Scaricon.com. I talk about this event all of the time when it's approaching, and it is approaching. We've got 2 weeks. 2 weeks from tonight, actually, I will be in Framingham, Massachusetts, getting ready for the show. It's June 7th through the 9th, as I said, in Framingham at the Sheraton Hotel and Conference Center there. And it is an event that features celebrities and from horror and sci-fi and paranormal entertainment, plus film screenings all weekend long, parties, really terrific, unique vendors, and what am I missing? Panel discussions and presentations, question and answer sessions with the celebrities, photo ops, a lot of great stuff. If you go to Scaricon.com and you see some of the celebrities that we have coming, like Billy Zane and Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, her real name is Cassandra Peterson, and Heather Langenkamp, and Felissa Rose, and Jason Lively, and a bunch of people from the movie Terrifier, and the cast reunion from the movie Phantasm. Actually, if you look at the whole thing, it's from all 4 movies of Phantasm, because many of the same cast members were in all of those films. They're all going to be there. Shake their hands, say hello, take pictures, get autographs, all that stuff. It's in Framingham, Massachusetts. It's family friendly. Check it out, Scaricon.com. A couple other things I want to remind you of. We do this show as a podcast as well. Well, we don't do it as, we take the show from the preceding night, then we edit it into a podcast so that people who can't listen to the show live have an opportunity to listen to it that way. So if you've got an iPhone, go to your app store, or not your podcast icon, and find Beyond Reality Radio, the podcast, and subscribe to it. Listen to it that way, too. It's always a great way. I know we have a lot of people that get the show in that form. It's also available for droids through their podcast platform as well. And then finally, if you're looking for something that has a little visual content, not that it's anything fantastic, but you can go to YouTube and just search for JV Johnson. I live stream the show from my studio perspective, and it's archived there as well. Hundreds of shows there for people to listen to if you go back in the archives, plus other content. And I'd love for you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We want to get those numbers up. Share all of that as well with your friends, your family, anybody who you think would enjoy the content that we have on the program. So let's see. That's going to do it for now. We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll bring our guest in. Again, Stephen Sakellarios will be joining us. We'll be talking about reincarnation on tonight's program. It's Beyond Reality Radio.
Scaricon New England, the fan convention for all things pop culture, horror, and paranormal, is almost here. June 7th through the 9th at the Sheridan Hotel and Conference Center, Framingham, Massachusetts. Scaricon brings an amazing group of celebrities, including Cassandra Peterson. You know her as Elvira, Mistress of the Dark.
Elvira.
Heather Langenkamp, Amanda Wiss, and Lisa Wilcox from the Nightmare on Elm Street films. Plus, a 40th anniversary cast reunion and screening of the cult classic Phantasm. And many more. Scaricon also features panel discussions, film screenings, great vendors, and parties. It's a weekend of fun from start to finish. For more information, visit Scaricon.com or check us out on Facebook. Use the promo code BRR at checkout to save 25% on your admission. That's Scaricon.com. Scaricon.com. Scaricon New England is being held June 7th through the 9th in Framingham, Massachusetts.
Visit the website today. Use promo code BRR with your ticket purchase to save 25% on admission.
All right, welcome back to the show. It's Beyond Reality Radio. I'm your host, JV. Thanks for being here. Be sure to like the program wherever you find it in social media and check out our webpage, beyondrealityradio.com. A lot of great stuff there, including our list of affiliate radio stations. Still the best way to listen. Find a station in your area that carries the program. And if there's one in your area that doesn't carry the program and you think they should, go to their website, click on the Contact Us thing, and let them know about it. Anyway, tonight we're going to be talking about reincarnation. This is a topic that has a lot of people not only curious, but fascinated and very, very interested, especially our guest tonight. Stephen Sakellarios is the director of a film that looks at the topic, plus author of a couple of books that discuss the topic, particularly his own reincarnation experiences. Stephen, welcome to Beyond Reality Radio. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I guess the first question here, I mean, I think we all kind of ponder this every once in a while during the course of our lives, particularly, I would say, as we get older and we start to approach immortality. I'd like to say immortality, but mortality is the word. At what point in your life did you become so interested in this topic that you started to pursue researching it?
Well, I had studied it from the point of view of Eastern philosophy since I was about 19, so I was quite comfortable with it. I started with reading the Bhagavad Gita just after high school, and it just made perfect sense. I don't recall any struggle with it or anything. It's like, okay. But I launched a one-man video production company in about 1997. And when I did that, I thought, well, I don't want to get so caught up in the commercial end of it that I lose the creative side, because really I started with an interest in, fine art photography and got into video, and I really was more of an artist than a businessman, which ended up, that's the way things ended up, But I said, well, I want to have a creative project. And long story short, I woke up one morning and I knew it was going to be about reincarnation. I don't know what discussion I had with whom,
Right.
At night. Everybody leaves their body at night, when they sleep. So maybe I had a discussion with somebody. But anyway, I woke up and I knew that was going to be the topic. But I had no idea there was any research that had been done by scientists and by, lay persons in the Western world. And as soon as I started on the project, I immediately started encountering it with the work of Carol Bowman and Dr. Ian Stevenson and some others, and realized there had been quite a bit of work done.
Yeah, so you're saying then your interest in the topic to the point of actually researching it coincided with your interest in the creative project. It kind of started at the same time.
Right. It was just I wanted some creative project. I didn't have any idea what it was going to be on it at that time.
You mentioned a couple of names here, and I actually wrote those names down as well. Let's talk about a few of those people, because they're instrumental not only in your film, but in the research that has been done on this particular topic. So tell us who Dr. Ian Stevenson was.
Well, he was a psychiatrist who was very interested in the phenomenon that had been around for a while. He wasn't the first one to discover it. I believe that Paramahansa Yogananda talked about it years before, for example. But it's of children who had very clear recall of a previous lifetime, usually the most recent lifetime. And usually it turned out that they had died a violent death, which seems to play into it somehow in terms of remembering things so clearly. And I personally think, I can't attribute this to Dr. Stevenson, but I think it's partly people that haven't gone through the normal process of going into the astral realm and digesting their experience and coming back through and then going through this forgetfulness process. Some of those children died violently and they reincarnated very quickly and they didn't go through that, so they didn't lose their memories. That's my theory. But at any rate, he started studying this phenomenon, and having this scientific background, he started studying it, very rigorously, taking very careful notes and eliminating all the possible explanations, normal explanations that he could come up with. And he has, thousands of cases, but as I understand, at least 250 very, very strong cases that are very difficult to explain away by any normal means, because these children remember details. We're talking, before age 7 or so, young children, sometimes as soon as they can talk. And they insist on it. Their parents try to shut them up, and they can't, and they want to go see their real parents and their real family, and they remember the names, and they remember the town and what they used to do, and eventually they'll finally say, okay, we'll take you, so they take him to the town, and they try to test him, and the kid knows his way around, and he knows where he used to live, and he knows his sister, and he acts appropriately emotionally to the different people, the former husband or the former mother-in-law or whatever it is. He acts appropriately, and he knows where the money was buried in the backyard, and where he wrote his name over the door, and so forth. And he also has the talents. He knows how to run the machine that he used to run when he was in that lifetime. And there's a lot of different indicators. Not only that, but he may have a birthmark right where he was shot. So Dr. Stevenson investigated that phenomenon also. It goes on and on and on, and there's no question that it's, he says it's suggestive of reincarnation because as a scientist he has to say that, but he proved it, in my opinion.
Well, I suppose, and you did address this a little bit, but what you're saying here is that in Stevenson's work, he not only listened to the words of these children, but he then went to verify their words in a historical record, I'm assuming, but also with the children on site, or in some other way, he was able to determine that these weren't just the fancies of imagination.
Well, he took statements by the children and by witnesses, the parents or relatives, of what the child had said before they had any normal way of knowing whether those statements were correct or not. And when I say statements, he might get 20, 30, 40 statements that could be either proven or disproven, and then they would check them out, and they would check out, So, and it's important to keep in mind that he tried his very best to shoot down each case, as though he were a skeptic. He tried his very best to think of any normal explanation, and kind of whittled it down that way.
And you said when it came to about 250 of these cases, he just couldn't explain any of it away.
Well, each case taken by itself might have some flaws. It wasn't perfect because maybe the statements weren't written down before the kid went there, or who knows. Each one had a little flaw in it. Maybe there wasn't necessarily any one case that was absolutely perfect. But when you put 250 of them and string them together, it's pretty clear what's going on.
Yeah, and I also noticed that there's a geographic or maybe a cultural concentration to some of this. It's more common. Those stories were more common in I believe, Indian families and in Eastern cultures. Is that correct?
It appears to be correct. I think it's more a matter of whether those cases came to light or not. There does seem to be a difference in the number of details remembered. The Western kids don't remember as instead they might have 6 or instead of 40. Memories. Still, 6 is enough to, pretty much establish that it's real, but that seemed to be a difference as I understand it. But as near as I can tell, the cases come to light where the parents aren't absolutely dead set against it. I even remember, I'm pretty sure I remember this, that, my father was in the Merchant Marine, and at some point he was talking about ships, and I blurted out, Daddy, I was on ships too. And what happened was I got shut down for that. Whereas if you're in a family where reincarnation is accepted, then they say, "Oh, tell me more." See? So those cases get, brought to public attention or to the attention of researchers, and the ones like mine never see the light of day.
So then what we mean here is that maybe in Western cultures, particularly in the United States, children are conditioned to not believe, not talk about it, or not remember those details.
Well, all children apparently stop. Most children lose the memories at about age 7, somewhere in there. But it's my personal theory that just about all children remember them before then. Maybe not in that much detail, but all children have past life memories up till about age 7 is my interpretation. Dr. Jim Tucker, who is Dr. Even Stevenson's successor, disagrees with me on that. So I'll just put that as my own. I think Carol Bowman would agree with that.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about Carol Bowman on the other side of the break because we've got to go to break here in about a minute.
Sure.
But you mentioned the Dr. Stevenson's successor. Was he the gentleman interviewed in your documentary talking about Stevenson's work?
No, that was Tom Schroeder, who traveled with Dr. Stevenson. He was an editor for the Washington Post.
Right.
Dr. Tucker, I interviewed him after the documentary and posted it online, and it's gone more or less viral. Can be found pretty quickly, but it didn't end up in the documentary.
And it was that gentleman who kind of went to verify Stevenson's work, and he felt pretty convinced that, again, in at least a number of the cases, that there was no what that would be considered normal explanation other than what we're talking about tonight.
Tom Schroeder was a pretty hardcore skeptic, and he was convinced, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to continue the conversation after the break. We've got a lot of discussion left with Stephen Sakellarios. We're talking about reincarnation. Did you know that online retailers like Amazon have constant deals that can save you money on the things you buy every day? It's no joke. Save 40%, 50%, even 80% on great products, and all you have to do is know about them. Noodle Shark is the way to be alerted when something good is coming your way. Noodle Shark is the social media page that lists great deals that not only save you money, but give you the deals before anyone else has them. All you have to do is find Noodle Shark on Facebook. Search it as The Noodle Shark. That's The Noodle Shark, because you deserve to save too. Become a shark and save. Reincarnation is our topic tonight on Beyond Reality Radio. Our guest, Stephen Sakellarios, we're talking about his experiences and a film he directed called In Another Life, Reincarnation in America. Stephen, were you a filmmaker prior to that? I know you said you kind of were looking for a creative project, and this was it. Was this the first one you had done?
Yeah, I had done a little commercial video, but that's the first actual film that I'd attempted, yeah.
And I think if I saw the date correctly, it was about 2003 that you released it?
That's correct. Yeah, it took me about 5 years.
Yeah, that's a project like that is no small undertaking. Let's talk about a name that you mentioned before the break, Carol Bowman. She's featured in the documentary. She's got a book that's called Children's Past Lives, and she sheds a lot of light on this particular topic. How significant is her work?
Well, very significant, and I think maybe it doesn't get quite as much attention as it deserves. But she, also became aware of Dr. Stevenson and also a past life therapist, Roger Wolger. And so she kind of brought past life therapy and Dr. Stevenson's work together. But she's still focused mostly on children, as you know. She had another book called Return from Heaven, which focused on what they call same family cases, where people would reincarnate back into their own families. But there's some pretty strong evidence in both of those books. And she also was the Leininger case, James Leininger case, which hit the mainstream a few years ago, was also originally hers, I believe.
And one of the things she talks about in the film is the 4 signs of past life memory. And what she was trying to do, I think, is discern between a child that may be talking about something from their imagination versus talking about something from a past life. And those 4, do you want to go over those points? Because I think they're pretty significant.
Sure. When I used to do interviews for my documentary, I had them right at my fingertips. But I remember that she said something about that the child would use a serious tone, that it wasn't like a sing-song tone. But I've forgotten the other 3, so you'll have to refresh my memory.
Yeah, matter of fact tone was the first one, and then there was consistency over time, which was obviously very important, meaning that the story doesn't change. Knowledge beyond experience, which is huge in my estimation. If a child talks about something they have not been exposed to, could not have heard of or been educated on, that information has to come from somewhere else, and then corresponding behaviors and traits.
Right. Absolutely. Comes back to me now.
Yeah, and the corresponding...
and you put all those 4 together. You know, one of them, as you say, is enough, but you put them all together, and you got a pretty clear indication that, you know, unless you've missed something, you know, like the kid went next door and saw a film when he wasn't allowed to or something.
Right.
Unless you've missed something, it's pretty clear something is going on.
Right. And that's I would assume what the skeptic would say. Well, obviously you don't know what your child has been exposed to all the time. You could have been watching, you know, in one of the accounts that you feature in the documentary, a woman talks about her child explaining that he had been killed by a wire being wrapped around his neck, and he remembered this.
Right.
And obviously the child hasn't been exposed to that directly. But then first thing in my mind was, you know, maybe the parents were watching The Godfather one night, didn't realize the kid was out of bed peeking around the corner, and there's one of those scenes in it. So, you know, you just don't know. So it's got to be a combination of things to help support the story.
Yeah, well, this is why Dr. Stevenson, you know, studied, especially why he went to India, I think, because these children, you know, we're talking way before the internet now. These children were in little villages where they really weren't exposed to media, and they're remembering things about a village that's 150 miles away that the family has never been to. So, you know, it's possible to eliminate those natural explanations, but you have to be rigorous about it.
Sure.
You know, it is possible to eliminate them.
Yeah. Now, you, again, in conducting the interviews, you talked to many people who had their own personal experiences with their children. As you were conducting those interviews, what was your sense? Did you go into that as a skeptic or as a believer or as someone who just wanted to get to the truth?
Well, I wanted to get to the truth. I believed in reincarnation, like I said, since I was 19, so I didn't have any personal problem with it. But I knew that I know it's a hard sell, and I wanted real evidence as much as possible. Now, the woman that I interviewed about her son, I had really wanted to use one of Carol Bowman's cases, but she wasn't willing to share any of hers, so I had to try to look for one myself, and I didn't have any trouble finding one. Maybe it was just, you know, synchronicity or serendipity or whatever, but it didn't take me a week before I found that case. And then she tried to back out, but I already had the model release signed. I'd already done the interview. She stopped. She refused to communicate with me after the interview.
So wait, so the woman that whose story is shared in the documentary itself, you did the interview after the fact. She did not want that interview aired.
Well, she just wouldn't. She wouldn't get back to me. You know, she wouldn't. In other words, she wouldn't have anything more to do with me one way or another afterwards. Wouldn't respond to any, you know,
is there a stigma?
Inquiries or anything. So she just shut the door after that. Yeah. I think she might have been influenced by somebody. You know,
I was going to ask.
Whom.
I was going to ask. Is there a stigma?
Fortunately, as I said, I had the model release. She didn't contact me and say no, don't use it. She
just wouldn't talk to you. Yeah. Is there a stigma associated with this? I mean, if a parent says, "I think my child is recounting a past life," is there a ridicule that comes along with that? Have you discovered that?
What I found is that there isn't supposed to be, and the way that you introduced it in this opening to this segment was, you know, everybody's curious and so forth and so on. And according to the Gallup poll, something like 21% of Americans or 24% of Americans, depending on the poll, say they believe in reincarnation. But what I find is that people really don't want anything to do with it. And in other words, the reality is a lot worse than that. So you're really up against not only being ridiculed, but you're up against not being able to get a job, being inexplicably turned down, for jobs and shunned and so on if you really come out for this.
Once you released the film, did you get a swell of people contacting you trying to share their stories?
Not at all.
Really?
I had one professor of religion who was very enthusiastic about it. And apparently, he said he wrote to 75 of his colleagues enthusiastically, but none of them apparently none of them were interested. At Films Media Group, who also carries Bill Moyers, to give you an idea of their credibility, they sell to colleges and universities. They carried it and continue to carry it and offer it to colleges, but it very rarely sells. I wrote to each PBS station that I could find individually. There was 200 of them, and I managed to write to most of those. And a lot of times I didn't get a response. Occasionally I got a response that, like, one guy says, "We do not air pseudoscience." And another guy said, "We do not plan to air this, period." That was the extent of his letter, But one station in Denver aired it.
Yeah, I don't think in 2003 you had the YouTube option, which now allows anybody to basically have their work seen. And if it's about getting a message out, it's a great way to do it. Let's talk about I guess I'll call it the mechanics of reincarnation. The idea here is that we have a soul, and a soul that I suppose is eternal. And our bodies are merely a clothing or a dressing for that soul that is temporary. Explain it from what you've learned from the people that you've talked to and your own experiences. What is reincarnation as we talk about it tonight?
Well, we do have a soul and we do have a body, but there's an intermediate part of us that's the astral body or energy body. And even that's being kind of simplistic, but we'll just throw it in there, it depends on what level you want to talk about this. But let's say that who you really are is this astral body. You really never were the physical body in the first place. What makes you alive is this astral body enervating and energizing the physical body. So reincarnation simply means that this astral body has dropped one physical body, taken a rest, and entered another one. And as I understand it, generally speaking, I understand, I have it from good authority, actually, that the astral body enters the fetus at about 21 weeks. This came from Baba Hari Das, and I heard it in his presence while he was counseling a young couple.
So who's responsible for all this? Is this the work of God? Is this the work of the Matrix? What's at play here?
Well, this, of course, is something I don't know from my own experience. I'm a follower of Meher Baba, spiritual teacher Meher Baba, which I have been since 1974. And according to his teachings, the soul is to the oversoul as a drop is to the ocean. That's the analogy he uses. So the soul really is the oversoul. It's just apparently or temporarily separated out like a drop would foam up from the ocean. And during that period when the drop is suspended and not in the ocean, that's the whole evolution and reincarnation process. That that little instant there, because in the cosmic scheme of things.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Keep going.
No, it's okay. Go ahead. No,
I'm just trying to understand, because there seems to be, if this is a divine plan, it seems as though I'm trying to figure out what the point of this physical existence is at all. Why is the
It's all God wanting to know himself, to become conscious of himself through the soul, through the whole process of evolution and what Meher Baba calls involution, which is the conscious journey back to God. It's all about consciousness.
And is everyone a reincarnated soul, or are there new souls also being created, and are there souls that are being moved on to something else instead of another physical form?
Well, again, I have to go with Meher Baba's teachings, and a little bit of I picked up from others, but it's a continual process. There are new souls being created only in the sense of being separated off from the ocean of God. They're not created as in, because something eternal can't be created. It's an oxymoron.
Right.
So they're separated, and but everybody's been reincarnated hundreds of thousands of times. You know, not like in the New Age teachings where you say, "Oh, I've had 7 reincarnations," or "I've had 5." No, we're talking. Ultimately, I think Mayor Baba says 8.4 million human reincarnations, and there's animal ones before that. So it's a very, very, very long process.
8.4 million.
For afterwards, it's not entirely clear, but according to Mayor Baba, you keep reincarnating all the way through the process. According to his teachings, there's not this point at which you get where you don't have to reincarnate anymore, but there may be exceptions to that.
And you said 8.4 million reincarnations. That's per soul? That's one soul?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
That's one soul has 8.4 million before consciously realizing itself as God.
And then animal existences before that.
Before that,
Yeah.
right.
Right.
All the way through from mineral stone all the way up.
Stephen, when we leave the physical plane, first of all, how much time in between leaving and coming back? And secondly, do we have any control whatsoever as to how or where we come back?
Okay, as to the first question, as near as I can tell, because you have to pick this up from different sources, you know,
Sure.
it looks like it's average maybe about 80 Earth years, but time is different in the astral world. The subjective experience of time is different, but as we measure it, it might be typically around 80 years, but there's certain circumstances in which people reincarnate more quickly, including, as I said, a violent death tends to bring somebody back faster. It's also possible to stay for much, much longer periods of time, like, you know, hundreds of years. And as a matter of fact, it's my understanding that there was a period of history in India where yogis would do austerities specifically designed to be able to live for very, very long periods in the astral realms. So, you know, it could be very, very quickly, or it could be, you know, 80, 100 years. I was told in a psychic reading that I'd been coming back relatively quickly for quite some time. You know, I don't know whether that was accurate or not. I don't know. And tell me again, what was the second?
The second one is: do we have any control as to how or what or where we come back? Where we, you know, which any decision making in that at all? Do we have any control over that?
Yeah, and the way that I look at it as an analogy is in college, you know, the freshmen have to take core courses and they don't have a lot of choices, but by the time they're a senior, they've got electives and they have a lot more control over what courses they're going to take. So I suspect it's like that. If you've been in the process for a while and you've matured spiritually, then you have more choice in the matter. I think that there's guides that help you make decisions, but a lot of it has to do with karma, which we haven't talked about, but the unfinished business. You know, you reincarnate when and where you get the opportunity to finish your unfinished business.
And when we come back, what is it that makes us lose, most of us anyway, lose the memories of that past life?
Well, that's a good question, and that's something that's come up in my research, I think. And I'll tell you what I've concluded is that you don't have the same associations and you don't have the same brain. So I think that not having the same brain, you can't interface. It's not that the memories are exclusively stored in the brain, but it's an interface, and you don't have the right interface connections to get to those memories in ordinary consciousness. Now, under hypnosis, you kind of paralyze that part of the brain, and then I think you're able to access them directly, maybe through the astral body, because there's the astral body is there's a correlation between everything in the physical body and the astral body, so there must be something like an astral energy brain, and under hypnosis, your physical brain is kind of, paralyzed, and you're able to access that directly. This is just theories on my part, kind of educated guesses.
Sure.
But you don't have the same association. So, I live now in Portland, Maine, where I lived in my past life for about 20 years. And I can go to places. The whole place has changed a lot. There's a few landmarks that are still the same. If I stand in front of the First Parish Church downtown, which is a stone structure, I get a jolt of recognition. But I don't remember I don't specifically remember being there or what I wore or what the occasion was or any of that, but I definitely recognize the thing. There's no question about it.
Right.
So it's what I found is the emotions are there, the intuition is all there, and the higher mind is all there. The way your mind works, what you think is funny, the way your turns of phrase, your preferences, your values, all that's still there. What's not there is the middle level of when I look at something. I get these associations and I get these cognitive memories and all of that. That's normally speaking not there because you don't have the same associations.
Right. Looking ahead, however, tomorrow night is a best-of program, as each Friday is here on Beyond Reality Radio. Then Monday night, we've got two guests, actually three. In the first hour, Scott Wolter will join us. Scott is a forensic geologist. He's also host of a television show called America Unearthed, that's on the Travel Channel, and he'll be talking about the new season of that program that starts on the 28th of this month. And in the second hour of Monday night's program, Chad and Alta Dillard will be here to talk about their personal firsthand accounts of things like UFOs, time anomalies, and alien implants. They have a book about it called High Strangeness in the French Quarter of New Orleans, and we'll be talking about that in the second hour of Monday night's program. So we've got a lot of great stuff coming up. I will also mention to you that you need to check out Scaricon.com. It's the website for a great event that's coming up June 7th through the 9th in Framingham, Massachusetts. Very, very close to Boston, very easy to get to if you're anywhere in the Northeast, and it's going to be a great weekend. Celebrities, parties, panel discussions, film screenings, all part of your admission for the weekend. It's a family-friendly event. It's got a host of great vendors as well, very unique vendors, and it's going to be a great time. So, again, Scaricon.com, check that out. And I'll also ask you to swing by the YouTube channel and give that a subscribe if you would. It's JV Johnson on YouTube. You can see the show stream live there if you can't find a radio station in your area that carries it. Plus, you can see a whole library of archived programs and other features as well. Again, it's YouTube. And it's JV Johnson. Search it. It's easy to find. Let's continue our conversation with our guest tonight. Stephen Sakellarios is a film director. He directed a documentary called In Another Life, Reincarnation in America. And we've been talking about what exactly reincarnation is for the first hour of the discussion. And now I want to turn this discussion to Stephen's personal experiences. Stephen, you set out to create a creative project. You decided on a documentary film about reincarnation. At some point after completing the film, you must have started questioning your own experiences, which led you down a very different path, didn't it?
Well, I had studied the strongest cases I could get my hands on for some years, including Captain Robert Snow, who was a detective head of homicide investigation for the city of Indianapolis, who on a dare, he was dared to undergo a hypnotic regression. He did so not believing in it. He was fully immersed in a past life experience, three of them actually, but one that he could prove. He tried to disprove it, and he ended up proving it. So, I had studied cases like that. But I had also had a psychic reading some years earlier, and this woman had told me that I was a female writer on the West Coast around the 1930s, something like that, 20s or 30s. So I was always keeping an eye out for names of female writers that might seem familiar. Every once in a while I'd get online and I'd just search around and, not in any systematic way. And I bumped into one that did seem familiar named Sarah Orne Jewett, except that it turned out that she was in the 1800s on the East Coast, one of the romantic writers. So I felt like I was close. I said, well, this isn't me, but I feel like this is very familiar. So one of the people in my documentary, Jeff Keane, who's got his own reincarnation case, I'd gotten to know him when he called me and I interviewed him. I was still in touch with him, and he seemed to have the ability of synchronicity. Somehow synchronous things would happen around him. I thought, well, maybe he can find it. So I emailed him, and he emailed me back in about half an hour and said I felt just directed somehow to go to this, deep into this website for Sarah Orne Jewett, and he found her social circle, and down at the bottom was Mathew Franklin Whittier, who's the younger brother of John Greenleaf Whittier, the poet. And the only thing we had on there was a picture, like a 3/4 etching, profile etching, and his name and the fact that he was an author, and I think it was either said or was understood that he was the younger brother of John Greenleaf Whittier. And as soon as I looked at the eyes in that portrait, I immediately felt that that was me, and that was the start of it.
And you say you've used the word feeling and felt a couple times in that particular answer to my question. What kind of feeling is this? Is this just a feeling of familiarity, or was it something more spiritual?
Well, it's a feeling of familiarity, but it's a very deep one.
Mm-hmm. And so you had a connection with this individual. You must have started a process of investigation at that point that started to probably create and then answer some questions for you.
That's right. The first two things, this is 2005, middle of 2005. The first thing I found was the life and letters of John Greenleaf Whittier, which was his letters and a brief biography at the start of it. I got that through interlibrary loan, and I read through the first part, which has to do with his childhood, which was also Matthew's childhood, since they were brothers. And then the next thing I found was that a student had done a master's thesis on Mathew in 1941. And so I got hold of that and read that. So that was my introduction.
As you started to dig into the life of this individual, did you start to see parallels between your current life and that particular life?
Well, I started to. The deeper I got into it, the more I found. There's unbelievable parallels. I don't use them for evidence. I didn't really focus on them because there's a lot of reincarnation writers that have tried to build a whole case on that. On coincidences and similarities, and it's never been convincing to me, at least not as a basis. It's kind of the icing on the cake. But yeah, I mean, I didn't know what kind of personality he had or what kind of writing he did or how his mind worked, and it's just right down the line like myself. I mean, the more than I could even begin to go into. I'm very much like him. There's a few little a few little differences, and those differences are areas where I've grown. For example, he was a satirist, humorist, satirical humorist, and on the radical left side, basically. And I have kind of learned the hard way not to be very careful about satire, more so than he did. So there's a little less of that in me than there was in him. But basically the same personality.
Did you find that this man, I'm not sure how to ask this, but from a spiritual standpoint, have you been able to communicate with any of the people that were around him?
Well, a few, I think. Can't prove it. There's only one, and that's his first wife, who I take to be a soulmate, who I've reconnected with, and I started that with two mediums. I had two psychic readings in 2010 and reconnected with her. But as far as other people, I think I've run into people that I think figured in his life, but I can't definitely prove it.
Yeah. Do you? I guess
I was really focused on proof. I mean, I was really trying to do this a la Stevenson.
Yeah.
So what I was specifically looking for was memories that I could document that I could later find in the historical record, which I would have had no way of knowing. And I got quite a few of them.
And what were the ones that really turned it for you? Obviously, there's going to be probably minor ones and then major ones. What really convinced you that this is what was going on?
Well, I wrote down in preparation here. I wrote down 20.
Oh, wow.
We're not going to go over 20, but I'll give you a couple. This one, there's two really, really strong ones. This one came under hypnosis. The other did not. What I saw in my mind's eye was I can see it as I'm talking, so I can kind of go from memory. I'm standing in an open area in a city, a town square, an open area, and on the far end is somebody standing in a farm wagon with a megaphone, and he's giving a speech, but people aren't really paying that much attention to him. There's a crowd of mostly men. They're in black coats and top hats, and they're kind of milling around. It's fairly thick crowd, maybe one person every 3 or 4 feet, and they're kind of milling around and not really listening to the speaker that intently. And my feeling is that there's something very important pending, not here, but somewhere, in the country. There's something about ready to come down. It's important. And when I first had that, I thought, geez, I wonder, is this the Emancipation Proclamation? What is this thing? I didn't know. I knew it was, I was pretty sure it was in Portland, Maine, because I'd studied Matthew's life, but I didn't know where. So 3 years later, whatever it was, I saw a historical picture of what was then called Congress Square, and the buildings looked familiar in the background. And I said, well, that's the place. I'm pretty sure that's the place, but I didn't have any idea what kind of event it could have been. And there's some enigmas about this thing. Why are they milling around? Why aren't they listening to the speaker? And why is it all men? Because usually you don't get a huge crowd of just men. Where's the women? Where's the kids? So some years after that, I stumbled upon the reference to it. It was called the Great Union Meeting. It occurred on January 26, 1861. It was when the South seceded from, or threatened to secede from the Union. They were threatening to. I don't think they'd done it yet. There was a town-wide meeting, and all the voters were called. Well, voters are men in 1861, right. So that's why it's all men. It was held in the town hall, but the town hall was overflowing, and because all the men in the city had turned out, there's no way they could all get in there, so the rest of them that couldn't get in the meeting would have gravitated to the two town squares. And the meeting that was in the town hall was rigged on the conservative side, so all the speakers were conservative. All of them wanted to make concessions to the South and beg them not to leave and make compromises and everything. So where are the radicals, because they wouldn't have, and I proved that this was the case because it's written about in the papers afterwards. So the radicals would have been given stump speeches from, from farm wagons and stuff. So it fit perfectly. I mean, all these enigmatic details were all solved by it being this one event. And, I remembered that something really big was coming down that really, might change things pretty substantially. And that was because the South was about to secede. Oh, and the other thing I remembered was a cynicism. Oh, well, we'll see, And so what that was the town fathers were saying, "Oh, don't worry, we're going to, give them concessions," and I was cynical as the radical, and I was saying, "Yeah, well, we'll see about that," So it fit right down the line about 6 or 7 different details.
Now, was this one that came to you through hypnosis or not?
That's one that came through hypnosis. Yeah,
I know you've kind of answered this, but I want to encapsulate it. What was his lifespan? When did he live? Where did he live? And we'll get into his work on the other side of the break, because we only have about 3 minutes here.
Okay, well, he was born in 1812, July 1812, in Haverhill, Massachusetts, on a farm. This is, John Greenleaf Whittier's younger brother. Now, this is relatively recent, but it turns out that about age 12, he seems to have run away from home because he wanted to be a writer and he wanted a higher education and he couldn't get one. So 2 things were happening. First thing, he was going between Boston and New York, writing for, looks like 4 different newspapers, or at least 3 different newspapers, 2 of them in Massachusetts and 1 in New York. At age 12 and 13. And also at some point, his future wife, who was 4 years younger, began tutoring him. She came from a privileged family. She had a privately tutored education, and she began giving him what he wasn't able to get from, schools. So between the 2, he educated himself, and he was also trying to develop a mercantile career, which was very spotty. But his literary career took off. But he published everything anonymously, almost everything. There's 1 or 2 or maybe 5 pieces total that he published under his own name. Very rarely he would do that. But everything was under pseudonyms, and the normal thing was to use 1 pseudonym or 2 pseudonyms, maybe. And eventually you'd get known for that, and people would know that he was, writing as such and such a signature. But Mathew would use them and drop them, or he had one or two that he kept throughout his whole life that he would return to, but he used hundreds or at least dozens anyway, probably hundreds of different pseudonyms. Therefore, his stuff is almost completely unknown. The only character he's known for is a satirical character named Ethan Spike, who was kind of like Archie Bunker of the 1800s. So that's it in a nutshell. He had a very sad life in many ways. He married his childhood sweetheart, Abby Poyen, but they lost two children, and then she died of consumption, which was tuberculosis, in 1841 after about 5 years of marriage. Then he was talked or tricked into a second marriage with a woman I think he hadn't even met before they married, and that was a disaster. And then he supported that family, 3 children, for as long as he could, for several years, and eventually he remarried on a practical basis for the last 20 years or so of his life. And he ended up working in the Boston Custom House as a clerk, kind of, which I think would have been torture for him in many ways.
Yeah.
But he also was, real quickly, he also was involved in the abolitionist movement underground, so he was an undercover agent, apparently, for William Lloyd Garrison, near as I can tell.
Stephen, Mathew was a writer. You said he wrote anonymously for the most part. But I also know there's some connection to some well-known authors of the time and writers of the time. What are those connections?
Well, I was going to say that one of the memories I had under hypnosis just came out of the blue. I was meeting with Edgar Allan Poe on a porch, on a cabin, and I went into that in some depth in the hypnosis session, but I didn't know anything about Edgar Allan Poe. I didn't have any reason to believe they'd had any connection. It didn't really mean anything to me. It seemed like an orphan, Yeah. Well, eventually I learned that Mathew was the real author of The Raven and a couple other things attributed to Poe. And within the last 6 months or so, I've been able to prove it. Nobody will believe me.
Really?
I can't get anybody to give me the time of day on it, but I can prove it. So that means that, it works both ways. That means that my memory under hypnosis had to be real, and I've narrowed it down. This had to be a meeting that occurred in late 1842 or the first month or two of 1843. There's reasons for that. But there it is. It's an outrageous thing. The other thing is that I not only determined, but I knew this, quite a bit earlier, that Mathew and Abby, his first wife, co-wrote the original version of A Christmas Carol, not Charles Dickens.
Wow.
So those are the two big ones, and there's a couple others that are fairly prominent.
Stephen, those are not just big; those are huge.
Yeah, they're huge.
Yeah, you say you learned that Whittier wrote The Raven. How did you learn that? Was that learned through your under hypnosis, through your recollections, or was it learned in a different way? Well,
let's see. Going all the way back to grade school, like 6th grade, when I first encountered that poem, I couldn't read it. It was too painful because it brought up these terribly painful memories of grief for some, spouse or some very special person. Mm-hmm. So, we're going back to there. But the way that I was able to prove this was through Mathew's own writing, because he left hints. He apparently did not feel that he could come out publicly and dispute it, partly because he was doing this undercover anti-slavery work, and it would have been dangerous to come out, and if he blew his cover, he wouldn't have been able to do the work. So he couldn't come out and publicly defend his work. But he left these hints. And, I've got like 1,600 or more of Mathew's published works, some newspapers and a few books. And I know how his mind works, and I know that he embedded coded messages in his work. When I say coded, I don't mean like cryptography, I mean references, and I knew that the instant I got hold of that thesis that had 4 or 5 of his Ethan Spike stories in the back, immediately I got the impression he used to embed a lot of personal references and code and stuff in these things. So that was like a past life memory that I got immediately. But there's a last count, I think it was like 20 instances of evidence that Mathew wrote
So you saw similarities in the style of between Whittier's style and The Raven, which is attributed at this point to Edgar Allan Poe. Were these works written intentionally, like in a ghostwriter sense, or were they stolen from Whittier, from what you've learned?
You're talking about The Raven?
I'm talking about any of these works. Raven, Christmas Carol, we've only talked about those two specifically.
It's different for different circumstances.
Okay.
A Christmas Carol was written by Mathew and Abby, and they had written similar treatments before that, both of them, and then they decided to write something together that combined both elements. And they wrote it as an outreach. They were trying to vicariously bring the reader through the conversion experience. And when I say conversion, I mean she had studied alchemy. So this was more alchemy, really, than it was Christianity, I would say. That they were trying to bring people vicariously through Scrooge's experience of personal redemption. And the idea was to reach as many people as possible. So after she died, Mathew apparently gave the manuscript to Dickens in Boston in February of 1842, for that purpose, hoping that he would use it because it would reach the greatest number of people. So that's the situation there. He also didn't realize how much Dickens was taking advantage of him, or what a unprincipled person Dickens was at that time, or he never would have done it.
Do any copies of that original work exist?
The only copies that exist, which you can find online, are Dickens' handwritten manuscript, which, of course, he would have copied over and burned the one that Mathew gave him.
Right.
A psychic told me that there had been one, but that it was burned in a fire, and Mathew did, in fact, have a fire at one of his apartments. I found that out afterwards. But you can get into that original, quote-unquote original, handwritten version by Dickens, and you can look at it very closely because it's online in Flash. You can zoom into a gnat's, hair. And you can, even though Dickens scribbled with a heavy corkscrew everything that was on there before, you can read quite a bit. If you study for a long time, you can find what was there before. And what was there before is Mathew's style more than Dickens. Dickens just stretched it out. His additions made it worse, because Mathew had a concise style and Dickens had a verbose style, and Dickens made it longer, put more words in and stuff. But there also was one little smoking gun in there I found, too.
Can you share what that was?
First off, you have to understand that Dickens was a materialist. He was not spiritual, he was not religious, and he was a skeptic. Abby, on the other hand, was deeply spiritual, had studied mysticism and the occult and so on. Was an esoteric Christian who'd also studied Hermeticism and alchemy. And, I have her poetry and her short stories. So her version would have been the believer's version, and his version would have been the materialistic version. Well, there is what Abby wrote were the ghost speeches. So where Marley's ghost talks, and where the Ghost of Christmas Future speaks, and so on, that's Abby's writing. But Dickens went in; he didn't like the spiritual references. So there's one place where the Ghost of Christmas Future is speaking. And I've got it written down, but it's going to take me a second to find it. He modified it to take out the reference to the soul being eternal. So, it's a very clear reference. I've got the little paragraph here. We don't have a lot of time in this format, but originally it used to say the soul set free immortal or something like that. And Dickens modified it to say to soul the world with life immortal. So he watered the whole thing down as far as the spiritual point of view is concerned. And the original writer of that, because that story has a lot of spiritual power in it, and the original writer would never have crossed out the soul immortal, never.
Now, you've mentioned Abby a few times, and I know that you've developed I guess we'll call it a special relationship with Abby. Explain that.
Well, I was doing background music for a self-help CD, and I was supposed to make samples, and I made a bunch of samples, none of which the person that was hiring me wanted, but one of them was completely different. It was like a sad little French song, that out of the blue I created, and she wanted to use that, but she wanted to strip it down and slow it down, and for background music. And I got real huffy, and I said, "Well, you can't use that. That was sent to me by my soulmate in Astral World, And I didn't know where that came from because I got pretty hot about it. You can't use that, So I began to have the feeling that she was trying to contact me. I connected it with Abby Poyne, historical Abby Poyne. I said, I think she wants to connect with me. So I hired a medium, and she did it. She did that for me and came up with a lot of hits about that turned out to be verified in the historical record. But she connected me with Abby, and then in December of that year, 2010, I hired another psychic, and he did the same thing. He connected me with her, and I gradually learned how to communicate with her. She helped me with a lot of this project. She could find evidence and send it to me or make it to where I could find it. And there's a number of instances of that, but there's one that's absolute proof.
I'm not sure how to ask this question because I don't know that there's any answer to it. But obviously, Mathew has been reincarnated in the form of you. He was predeceased by Abby, but yet she has not been reincarnated? Is that how that would have to work?
That's right. She hasn't been reincarnated. She was a very deeply spiritual person, and she always was about heaven anyway. She really didn't want to be here.
I see.
So under those circumstances, a person that really doesn't want to be in the physical plane at all and is very much oriented towards heaven, can stay there for a lot longer.
And so that does give us some sense that there is a bit of control involved there. You have some self-determination in that
for
sense.
More advanced. Yeah, for more spiritually mature people.
Right, yeah. Right. So you maintain communication with Abby now, right?
Yeah, best I can.
Yeah, and she continued. Can you do that yourself, or do you always need to use an intermediary as a medium or a psychic?
No, I've learned to do it myself. She taught me a prompting method pretty early on, yes or no. It was fairly accurate, but it was pretty limited because you have to play 20 questions, yes or no, yes or no. And then I learned to catch her thoughts, but it's not as 100% reliable. But it's interesting. It trues with what other people say. Her thoughts are very, very quick. They're before my mind has any chance to think anything, hers will come in, bang, like that. And you have to really be aware. You have to be watching for it because it's so fast you can just miss it. But you gradually learn to discern what's coming from her as opposed to what's coming from my subconscious mind. And the characteristic of the thing is that it's a burst of thought that's really like a whole paragraph's worth, all condensed in one zap, If you can catch it, it turns out to be pretty reliable. For example, she told me that my previous interview, which was only maybe a week ago, she said that one of the co-hosts was psychic, and I channeled her that way because there's a blog that I channel for her. So, I asked after the interview, I said, are you psychic? Because Abby told me you are, and turned out she was, So sometimes it can be validated,
Did Abby know right away when you made your first contact with her who you were, that you were her former husband reincarnated?
Yeah, it certainly looks that way. What the psychic told me was that she thought about calling me a whole hour before the scheduled session because she was getting bombarded with images for that whole hour. So apparently she was very eager to talk to me. So, yeah, she obviously did.
So you have, I think, 2 books outlining your experiences and how they connect to Mathew Franklin Whittier. One of them is In His Own Words, and one of them is In His Own World. What are the books about specifically?
Well, of course, they're trying to prove the case, and 95% of my evidence is Mathew's writing, published writing, and 98% of that was written under pseudonyms. Only one character of which was known historically. And a lot of the stuff, not just the famous ones that I mentioned, but a whole bunch of his work has been attributed by historians to other writers. And I had to dispute all those claims, and I had to do it effectively. And that took a lot of time because I couldn't use the evidence for my reincarnation case until I could prove that he was the author. So an awful lot of these are very long books, and a lot of the length is the detective work of trying to prove that he was, in fact, the author of this stuff. Once I could prove that he was the author, then I could go in and, show that my memories match up with what he's saying in his writings. And the beauty of it is that there's no possible way I could ever have seen it before. So it defeats what they call the cryptomnesia or false memory objection.
Are you 100% convinced, first of all, that reincarnation is real, and secondly, that you are in fact the reincarnated soul of Mathew Franklin Whittier? 100%.
I have been 100% convinced of reincarnation for many years. The conviction about myself being Mathew developed over time. The first couple of years, I would couch it as I think so, or, right. Proposed, or, but the evidence was so overwhelming that it's 100% now. Yeah.
Okay, so your website is IAL, which is basically an abbreviation for In Another Life, IAL.goldthread.com. You've got a lot more than just what we've talked about on that website. What's there? Yeah,
that website was originally designed to support the documentary while it was in progress. To report on, developments and, ask for help, very little of which was forthcoming. And, and then I was presenting everybody else's evidence, Carol Bowman's evidence and, Dr. Ian Stevenson. And, I wrote some articles of my own and recommended some books and had a lot of links, and it grew. It's pretty huge. And it's designed to try to give the best information on reincarnation that I could find. You won't find it on Google. It's dropped off Google, and I don't know if that was intentional or because there's just so much competition or what. But it isn't. You can't find it on Google at all. Not under keyword reincarnation anyway.
Yeah. Of the two books, we've only got about a minute left here, but you've got those two books. Which would you recommend somebody start with if they wanted to follow your story a little more closely?
Well, they're going to have to really be interested. But I would start with the beginning. Start with the first one. The second one will stand on its own, and it might actually be a little more user friendly. Mm-hmm. If you're, if you're kind of curious but not, really serious about it, you might start with the second one, because that one talks about me moving up here to New England and going to the actual places associated with Mathew's life, and then there's a whole bunch more research that went into it. The first one is the story of the research, and the research went on for like 10 years. So,
and the first one is in his own words,
right? And that's actually a play on words, because what it means is, since I am Mathew, anything I write in there is in his own words.
Right? Yeah, exactly. All right. Hey,
and the other one is in his own world, because that's when I moved up to New England to be in his world and actually visit these places.
Okay. Well, Stephen, it's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and thank you for being on the program.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
We've got a best of for tomorrow night's program, and then as we look to Monday, we've got 3 guests, 1 in the first hour, 2 in the second. Scott Wolter will join us. He's a forensic geologist. He'll be talking about his television program called America Unearthed. And in the second hour of the program, Chad and Alta Dillard, they've experienced UFO phenomena, time anomalies, alien implants, and they talk about their experiences in a book called High Strangeness in the French Quarter of New Orleans, and they'll share those stories with us on the program. That is, Monday night, second hour of Monday night's program. That's going to do it for me. Have a great weekend, everybody. Love you all, and we'll see you next week.
Beyond Reality Radio is hosted by Jason Hawes JV Johnson and produced by Alexandria Johnson and Slick Eddie Edwards for Entercom Radio. Beyond Reality Radio is distributed by Westwood One Radio Networks. Stop by our Facebook page and say hello. Follow the hosts on Facebook as well. For Jason Hawes, follow at jasonhawes.taps. For JV Johnson, follow at JVJ Paranormal. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Radio, or you have a suggestion for a guest, contact Slick Eddie Edwards at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com. Be sure to visit our chat room as well at beyondrealityradio.com. Thanks for listening.